You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 7th of February 2014. A legal immigrant deported 3 times, jailed again for possessing £27,000 worth of cocaine. Fanatics in Syria vow to bring terror home to UK. Terrorists say they will attack public transport and financial centres. William Roach, Coronation Street star, found not guilty of all sexual abuse charges. Italy. Letter moots Italian Islamic Museum on Venice Grand Canal. Frenchman sentenced to prison over kitten abuse video. 2 SME businessmen commit suicide every day in France. Female student dies after male paramedics barred from entering women's only campus in Riyadh. Turkish financial crisis adds to region's chaos. Bosnian High Court judge sacked for nude sunbathing on office desk. Thought for the day, lying Muslims and Casanovas. And finally, what is hell? UK news. A legal immigrant deported 3 times, jailed again for possessing £27,000 worth of cocaine. An illegal immigrant who was deported 3 times but returned on each occasion to commit yet more crimes has been jailed again for possessing nearly 30,000 quid's worth of cocaine. Albanian Baksim Bushati jumped out of a moving car to try to evade capture when he was spotted by officers on December the 17th last year. But he was rounded up by police dogs and traced to an address in Weedon where nearly 1 kilogram of cocaine worth £26,875 was found stuffed down the back of a sofa along with £14,000 in cash. Northampton Crown Court heard Bushati had been sentenced to prison terms totalling nearly 5 years since 2005 for offences of violence, battery and possessing false identification. He was deported from the UK following each jail term but repeatedly returned to continue his offending. He's been sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for his latest crime. The case provoked furious criticism of the government from Judge Richard Bray, who said it showed the UK's borders leaked like a sieve. World date, this judge is right. It is verging on the last sections of a Benny Hill film show at the moment. Fanatics in Syria vow to bring terror home to UK. Terrorists say they will attack public transport and financial centres. A group of Britons waging jihad in Syria have threatened to carry out terror attacks in the UK. The extremists warned of atrocities on London's public transport, at financial centres and also at the White House in the US. They are believed to be the first direct threats of terrorist strike in the West to emerge from Syria, where hundreds of Britons are amongst thousands of foreign fighters who have joined jihadist rebel groups. British counter-terrorism officials are taking the threats of terror attacks in the UK very seriously, sources said. In a series of threats issued online by the Riyadh al-Tawhid group, the British jihadist faction in Syria, one image shows a man inside a vehicle with an assault rifle as a red London Routemaster bus passes by. A slogan on the image in English says, "Sometimes you just got to get up and go." Another appears to make a reference to MI6. It shows a laptop computer with the barrel of an assault rifle resting on the keyboard and ammunition lined up under the screen, which displays an image of a handgun and the phrase, "You only die once, why not make it martyrdom?" World date. As far as I'm concerned, they can all blow themselves to kingdom come, just not take any one of us with them. They can be martyrs, they don't need us, or am I missing a point here? William Roach, Coronation Street star, found not guilty of all sexual abuse charges. The 81-year-old has been cleared of 2 counts of rape and 4 of sexual assault following a 4-week trial at Preston Crown Court. Police and prosecutors said that they would continue to investigate allegations of historic abuse involving celebrities despite the acquittal of Coronation Street star William Roach, who was found not guilty of rape and sexually assaulting teenage girls yesterday. The veteran actor who plays Ken Barlow became the 3rd cast member of the long-running soap to go on trial for sex abuse since last summer, only to be cleared after denying all allegations. He is now expected to return to the programme. The 81-year-old said there were no winners following the emotional conclusion of the case at Preston Crown Court. 5 women, now in their late 50s and 60s, claimed he had committed 2 counts of rape and 4 of indecent assault alleged to have occurred between 1965 and 1972. But the jury took under 6 hours to unanimously reject their claims after hearing 3.5 weeks of evidence. Nazir Afzal, chief Crown prosecutor in the North West, who was widely praised for his role championing victims in the Rochdale grooming case, has been forced to deny claims that he is presiding over a celebrity witch hunt. He said the Roach case had been treated like any other. "We have a duty to those who make complaints of serious offences to listen to the allegations and assess the evidence against the same evidential standards we use for all criminal cases, no matter who makes the complaint or who the complaint is against," he said. World at 8. More about Afzal in today's Thought. European news. Italy. Letter moots Islamic Museum on Venice Grand Canal. Venice Mayor Giorgio Orsoni wants to put his city on the map as a site of internationally weighty institutions, and a possible Islamic museum plus study centre is one of them. On Monday the mayor thanked Premier Enrico Letta for considering such a museum for the iconic city's Grand Canal, which in Orsoni's view could dovetail nicely with an existing Museum of Oriental Arts, a Council of Europe office in St Mark's Square that often hosts Aspen Institute meetings, and a planned Orthodox Church study centre which would rise in the Mestre district on the mainland Venice. The Italian Premier said during a trip to Doha that his government made a commitment to explore the opportunity to build an Islamic museum in Venice on the Grand Canal. The project was slammed Monday by the regionalist anti-immigrant Northern League, which suggested Letta should focus on the economy and not cultural institutions. World at 8. Obviously Letta is being financed to think this way, and knowing Doha, they will get their way unless someone acts, and Venice will be Ottoman. Frenchman sentenced to prison over kitten abuse video. A 24-year-old man has been convicted of animal cruelty by a Marseille court after injuring a kitten by throwing it against an apartment building, then uploading a video clip of the act on his Facebook profile, officials said. Frenchman Farid Gilas has been sentenced to a year in prison. World at 8. Like the French, we seem to adopt these people. He is something, but he ain't French. But at least most of the French migrants seem to speak French, but coming from that new Muslim enclave of Marseille, perhaps he can't. Bad idea. Computers, mobiles and Facebook for immigrants, and yet another way of becoming famous even for cruelty. Whipping and stocks would have been better and more gratifying for me anyway. 2 SME businessmen commit suicide every day in France. Roughly 2 company directors of small and medium-sized enterprises commit suicide every day in France, accounting for 7% of the national total. The number of SME chiefs deciding to end their lives is steadily increasing, according to a French observatory for SME owners quoted by Le Parisien on Wednesday. To mark Suicide Prevention Day, the newspaper published the following figures. Every day 28 people kill themselves in France and 700 others try to. Some 75% of them are men, and suicide ranks as the highest cause for death for those between the ages of 25 and 35, and the third highest for farmers. The numbers fell by 8% in France between 1990 and 2010. In 2011, 10,359 people killed themselves. World at 8. What do the authorities expect with the Islamification of their country, the EU for their farmers and a socialist government? World news. Female student dies after male paramedics barred from entering women's only campus in Riyadh. Thousands of Saudis vented their anger online over a report Thursday that staff at a Riyadh university had barred male paramedics from entering a woman's only campus to assist a student who had suffered a heart attack and later died. The Okaz newspaper said administrators at the King Saud University impeded efforts by the paramedics to save the student's life because of rules banning men from being on site. According to the paper, the incident took place on Wednesday and the university staff took an hour before allowing the paramedics in. However, the university's rector, Badran Al-Omar, denied the report, saying there was no hesitation in letting the paramedics inside. He said the university did all it could to save the life of the student, who was identified as Amna Bawazir. The rector said Bawazir suffered a heart attack and collapsed suddenly on the campus on Wednesday. Saudi Arabia follows a strict interpretation of Islam. Sexes are segregated in schools and almost all Saudi universities. Women also have separate seating areas and often separate entrances in family sections of restaurants and cafes where single males are not allowed. The kingdom's top cleric has warned against the mixing of the genders, saying it poses a threat to female chastity and society. Al-Omar said the staff called campus health officials within minutes of Bawazir collapsing, and that about 25 minutes later they called the paramedics. World at 8. And they still preach about apartheid in South Africa and the Deep South in the US, where they encourage this form of sexist apartheid in Islam. Hypocrites. Turkish financial crisis adds to region's chaos. More than coincidence accounts for the visit to Iran by Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan on January the 28th, the same day that his economic policy collapsed in a most humiliating way. As the Turkish lira collapsed to levels that threatened to bankrupt many Turkish companies, the country's central bank raised interest rates, ignoring Erdogan's long-standing pledge to keep interest rates low and his almost daily denunciation of an interest rate lobby that sought to bring down the Turkish economy. Erdogan's prestige was founded on Turkey's supposed economic miracle. Hailed as the next superpower by John Pfeffer in the Institute for Policy Studies and as Europe's brick by The Economist, Turkey has become the sick man of the Middle East. It now appears as a stock character in the comic opera Third World Economics, a corrupt dictatorship that brought popularity through debt accumulation and cronyism and is now suffering the same kind of economic hangover that hit Latin America during the 1980s. World at 8. And this is the country they want to bring into the already corrupt monetary system of the EU. Bosnian High Court judge sacked for nude sunbathing on office desk. Court. Bosnian judge was relaxing on her desk but bosses said it was unacceptable. The judge in Bosnia and Herzegovina was spotted in her office at 8 AM where she was seen exercising in the nude before lying down on a table, either to catch her breath or to enjoy the warmth of the sun through the window. The incident happened last summer but came to light only recently when paperwork about her actions was leaked to local media. An inquiry had been set up after the naked judge was photographed by another early riser working at the council offices across the road from the court in Sarajevo. The picture had been published at the time by local media which had not identified her. The inquiry revealed her as a senior judge. The matter was referred to the disciplinary commission of the Supreme Court. She was fired after it ruled her behaviour had damaged the image of the Supreme Court. Her behaviour as a senior judge was not acceptable, a report added. However, the judge said her office door had been locked and she was entitled to exercise as a way of warming up for the day ahead. She said she had not expected any staff to be in the building opposite at that time. World at 8. Seen the picky, but this guy would have had to climb on his desk by the look of it to take it. He's an ageist and sexist bastard. What is he doing at the council offices at that time of the morning anyway? Thought for the day: lying Muslims and Casanovas. Well, you had to hear it from me and Radio Britain, didn't you? If you didn't already know that most, if not all people who follow Islam seem to be the most awful liars, or at the very least prevaricators of the most devious kind, and most of those have an earnest expression on their faces. Such a one, of course, is our old friend Nazir Afzal, he of the highest politico honours given to our own tribe, let alone a Ferengi. Because that is what he is, a foreigner, however well educated in our system, or whatever, as the Americans say. I have never had any time for Afzal, and now he has proved to be all that we have been saying about him for a long, long time. He is ambitious, anti-white and anti-British, insofar as he might talk the talk about integration and very, very occasionally hit on the subject which should have brought about his resignation, that of his communities and their terrible record with sexual abduction, rape and prostitution of our young white girls in or around his area up north. But no, he has been behind most, if not all, the court cases concerning almost biblical cases, not historic as he likes to call them, against old white men who have been at some time in their lives actors or celebrities. And for the most part these crimes have been alleged to be pawing or groping or what passes for sexual molestation. Now what the hell is that? Sexual molestation in a very young child is despicable, whatever it might be, but to a thumping great teenage fan who's gone out of her way to be within hand's grasp of the monster, not so awful, I would suspect, especially after around 50 or 40 years, unless of course there's a lot of money involved if proven and a very nice new position further up the UK rung for our Muslim persecutor. No, not a slip of the tongue. Now you may say I don't like Afzal because he's a Pakistani Muslim, but strangely enough it isn't that. It is the fact he can, does and has ignored what has been going on in his own backyard while sticking his nose in an elite feeding trough that might or might not have proved more beneficial to him. I wonder if our Corro Ladroach will sue for wrongful arrest and trial and get around £250,000 for his trauma and loss of reputation, like our Muslim murderers from Blackpool, which enabled them to buy more kebab takeaways and recruit more girls from the back alleys in giving blowjobs to their pals for a packet of chips. Great work if you can get it. And not to be ignored is that this case alone has cost us £500,000. Not quite in the realm of the foreign aid given to Pakistan last year, I fear, which was raised from £267 million in 2012-2013 to £446 million in 2014-2015, making it the largest recipient of UK aid. I wonder what are Afzal's thoughts on the suggestion that the UK government should withhold extra aid to Pakistan unless the country does more to gather taxes from its wealthier citizens, a group of MPs has said. This is a country that doesn't even bother to tax its ultra-rich, even when they live partially in the UK yet keep homes in their own country, because of the money we give them. Afzal describes himself as a first-generation British Pakistani. What the hell is that? I can find nothing on Afzal before working in London in the 1980s. So was he born here or not? It doesn't matter. It doesn't alter what this man has been allowed to do and had honours heaped on him for just being the first Muslim persecutor. Now, unlike the southern areas of this country, which, although becoming more blacked out by the day, have not yet suffered the brunt of massive immigration that the hordes of Islam have perpetrated up north of the Thames, we can be left out down here with regard to this parasitical blight on our country, and I know that many of you object to the word grooming, and I take that on board. But up to us, the British National Party, calling it something, anything, and not using the Asian generality, we have to word it literally without hitting the mark on the head. Abduction, systematic rape, forced prostitution and torture are all words to be used, but we must remember that the Muslim way has been to softly, softly catch a monkey. They do not usually storm in and abduct and rape like the Vikings or the Russians in Germany in World War II. They approach and in a sense make these very young girls feel wanted, and that is why the term grooming is used. Not to soften the method of what actually happens, but to try to warn girls as to what is at the end of that first stage. Pain, drugs, alcohol, more pain, and having to do what they probably have to be drugged up to do, and of course much worse if they stray off the path of ownership or get pregnant. And this is something that Afzal has been systematically ignoring for his years as Chief Crown Persecutor for the northwest of England, because they are his own tribe. I truly wish he would go back to Rawalpindi and get on with his culture again, as he's clearly ignoring their deeds in the north of this country. Of course, highlighting more possible sexual crimes from the white community, and the older the better. The target is wealthier and more prone to just give up or drop dead after enough months of adverse publicity. And of course all the time the Muslim sexual activities are deflected and reduced to a few paragraphs, if any, in the local rags. Why? Well, the official line would be to avoid any flaring up of community relations, or rather the unofficial line of any matter or actions adversely racial or religious must be hushed up because the establishment up here cannot handle mass civil unrest without really offending the Muslims if handled properly. The Daily Mail is at fault as well. They've been printing all the crap on Roach and the others along with the other rags, and even today are still showing pictures years old with odd friends, etc. Now, we have all had odd friends, haven't we? We all have made mistakes in our lives that verge on the sheer stupid and foolhardy, haven't we? In the early 70s, as a young single woman again, I made some really stupid mistakes that could have ended very differently. I was on the fringe of a set in London who favoured East End gangsters, white, and covens, but somehow steer clear of the so-called famous names who I met. But nothing and no one would ever hear me banging on about anything that happened so very many years ago. They're filed away. And anyway, when I was much, much younger and single, it was Paul Anka and Elvis who rocked my boat, not the cast of Coronation Street or a few DJs. Call me odd, why don't you? I'm not surprised at the picture of Rasputin in a double-page spread today. He was an odd-looking guy, but I suppose, unlike the poor old white guys we've been reading about, groping wasn't his thing. I would imagine a man like that could talk a woman into bed, not to be backward about it. I've always been of the opinion that a man who can either laugh or talk a woman into bed is a lot more fun than a six-pack and Wonder Boy good looks. In fact, very handsome men and lovely women have a harder time getting partnered up or laid in the modern terms than merely attractive or pretty ones. Humans are funny, and the better looking you are, the more frightening you might be to people who feel they don't match up. Many great beauties and gorgeous men end up alone, and it ain't because they're nasty people, it's because Mr. or Miss Average used to be wary of them. Of course now everyone being drunk or on drugs, it doesn't matter, they can't see 'em anyway. And also the whole ethos of courting and marriage has changed. There was a picture of Susan Sarandon and her toy boy Jono, 36, and good luck to her. In days gone by it was the older woman who taught the boys what to do, and the young girls who married the slightly older men who knew what was what, and that has changed, but not for the better in my opinion. I think most of my generation have suffered with the occasional partner who really didn't know what to do, and in fact would have made a good table for the Times newspaper during the act itself. But as I said, seduction and laughter are great bedfellows. So here's to Susan and her toy boy. Laughs all round, I hope. In fact, on a lighter note, although I find the new animal marriages obscene, but only in the US could they pull those off, I'm off to marry my little black cat Pongo. He makes me laugh and my better half won't object as he can sit with his two brothers on his lap. Only joking, Avsal. Really, only joking. And finally, the thermodynamics of hell. The following is an actual question given on a University of Washington chemistry mid-term. The answer by one student was so profound that the professor shared it with his colleagues via the internet, which is of course why we now have the pleasure of enjoying it as well. Bonus question. Is hell exothermic, gives off heat, or endothermic, absorbs heat? Most of the students wrote proofs of their beliefs using Boyle's law. Gas cools when it expands and heats when it is compressed, or some variant. One student, however, wrote the following. First, we need to know how the mass of hell is changing in time. So we need to know the rate at which souls are moving into hell and the rate at which they are leaving. I think that we can safely assume that once a soul gets to hell, it will not leave. Therefore, no souls are leaving. As for how many souls are entering hell, let's look at the different religions that exist in the world today. Most of these religions state that if you're not a member of their religion, you will go to hell. Since there is more than one of these religions, and since people do not belong to more than one religion, we can project that all souls go to hell. With birth and death rates as they are, we can expect the number of souls in hell to increase exponentially. Now we look at the rate of change of volume in hell because Boyle's law states that in order for the temperature and pressure in hell to stay the same, the volume of hell has to expand proportionately as souls are added. This gives us two possibilities. 1. If hell is expanding at a slower rate than the rate at which souls enter hell, then the temperature and pressure in hell will increase until all hell breaks loose. 2. If hell is expanding at a rate faster than the increase of souls in hell, then the temperature and pressure will drop until hell freezes over. So which is it? If we accept the postulate given to me by Teresa during my freshman year that it will be a cold helling day before I sleep with you, and take into account the fact that I've still not succeeded in having an affair with her, then number 2 above cannot be true, and thus I'm sure that hell is endothermic and will not freeze over. This student received the only A. Lovely. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and safe weekend. And despite Somerset being in the news with awful floods and their landed gentry going to jail, our sympathies are with all the flooded people in the southwest region. The weather would have still happened with the BNP government, but more money would have been set aside for dredging and we would have ignored the EU's stance on deforestation of our farmlands. Vote carefully this year and the next.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 7th of February 2014. A legal immigrant deported 3 times, jailed again for possessing £27,000 of the cocaine. Fanatics in Syria vow to bring terror home to UK. Terrorists say they will attack public transport and financial centres. William Roach, Coronation Street star, found not guilty of all sexual abuse charges. Italy. Letter moots Italian Islamic Museum on Venice Grand Canal. Frenchman sentenced to prison where nearly 1 kilogram of cocaine worth £26,875 was found stuffed down the back of a sofa along with £14,000 in cash. Northampton Crown Court heard Bushati had been sentenced to prison terms totalling nearly 5 years since 2005 for offences of violence, battery and possessing false identification. He was deported from the UK following each jail term but repeatedly returned to continue his offending. He's been sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for his latest crime. The case provoked furious criticism of the government from Judge Richard Bray, who said it showed the UK's borders leaked like a sieve. World date, this judge is right. It is verging on the last sections of a Benny Hill film show at the moment. Fanatics in Syria vow to bring terror home to UK. Terrorists say they will attack public transport and financial centres. A group of Britons waging jihad in Syria have threatened to carry out terror attacks in the UK. The extremists warned of atrocities on London's public transport, at financial centres and also at the White House in the US. They are believed to be the first direct threats of terrorist strike in the West to emerge from Syria, where hundreds of Britons are amongst thousands of foreign fighters who have joined jihadist rebel groups. British counter-terrorism officials are taking the threats of terror attacks in the UK very seriously, sources said. In a series of threats issued online by the Riyadh al-Tawhid group, the British jihadist faction in Syria, one image shows a man inside a vehicle with an assault rifle as a red London Routemaster bus passes by. A slogan on the image in English says, "Sometimes you just got to get up and go." Another appears to make a reference to MI6. It shows a laptop computer with the barrel of an assault rifle resting on the keyboard and ammunition lined up under the screen, which displays an image of a handgun and the phrase, "You only die once, why not make it martyrdom?" World date. As far as I'm concerned, they can all blow themselves to kingdom come, just not take any one of us with them. They can be martyrs, they don't need us, or am I missing a point here? William Roach, Coronation Street star, found not guilty of all sexual abuse charges. The 81-year-old has been cleared of 2 counts of rape and 4 of sexual assault following a 4-week trial at Preston Crown Court. Police and prosecutors said that they would continue to investigate allegations of historic abuse involving celebrities despite the acquittal of Coronation Street star William Roach, who was found not guilty of rape and sexually assaulting teenage girls yesterday. The veteran actor who plays Ken Barlow became the 3rd cast member of the long-running soap to go on trial for sex abuse since last summer, only to be cleared after denying all allegations. He is now expected to return to the programme. This isn't over kitten abuse video. 2 SME businessmen commit suicide every day in France. Female student dies after male paramedics barred from entering women's-only campus in Riyadh. Turkish financial crisis adds to region's chaos. Bosnian High Court judge sacked for nude sunbathing on office desk. Thought for the day, lying Muslims and Casanovas. And finally, what is hell? UK news. A legal immigrant deported 3 times, jailed again for possessing £27,000 worth of cocaine. An illegal immigrant who was deported 3 times but returned on each occasion to commit yet more crimes has been jailed again for possessing nearly 30,000 quid's worth of cocaine. Albanian Baksim Bushati jumped out of a moving car to try to evade capture when he was spotted by officers on December the 17th last year. But he was rounded up by police dogs and traced to an address in